I was left at a hospital, no wallet, no phone, not even a goodbye, by my own daughter. They told others I fainted, but in truth they just wanted to get rid of me. I trusted my family, and they treated me like disposable trash. But guess what? I came back, and I took back everything. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now to catch more haunting and emotional story films from us. The Oregon sky had just begun to shift from a pale dawn gray to the softest hue of gold. The air outside was crisp, typical for early spring, and the mist hung low over the sloping hills that cradled the small town of Elmridge. Inside a secluded Victorian home that stood like a memory frozen in wood and ivy, Martha Ellison stirred awake. She didn't need an alarm clock. Her body still remembered the rhythms of field hospitals and triage tents from 50 years ago. It was always 5:30, sometimes earlier. Even though her limbs no longer moved with the quickness of youth, they obeyed with dignified precision. The creak of floorboards beneath her slippers echoed gently as she stepped into the hallway. Paintings lined the walls, landscapes of places she and Harold had once dreamed of visiting. Some were bought at auctions. Others were gifts from former students or soldiers whose wounds she had tended decades before. But it was the black and white photo at the hallway's end that held her eyes each morning. Harold Ellison, U.S. Army Captain, Vietnam, smiled from behind the glass. A man of sharp cheekbones and a laugh that always arrived before he did. He'd died 14 years ago from lung cancer, and yet his presence wrapped itself around the house like the scent of pipe tobacco still faint in the den. Martha paused in front of the photo, brushing her fingers across the glass. "Morning, Harold," she whispered. "You still keeping watch?" She made her way to the kitchen, once bright and filled with movement, now too still, too quiet. The coffee pot sputtered to life with a familiar gurgle. She poured herself a cup black, no sugar, the same way Harold had liked it, even though she had long preferred tea. Her days followed a careful routine, a walk around the garden just after sunrise, feeding the neighborhood cats that had long claimed her porch as a sanctuary, reading the local paper cover to cover, circling words in the crossword with the same meticulous attention she'd once applied to sutures. The house itself was a relic. 3 stories tall, gabled rooftops, wide bay windows, and the kind of woodwork no one bothered crafting anymore. The wallpaper had peeled slightly in the upstairs corridor, and the radiator in the guest room always whistled at odd hours, but it stood proud, as if defying time with each creak of its frame. The dining room table still held Harold's last chess set, midway through a game they'd never finished. Martha never touched it. A single rook tilted sideways on the board, white her side like a pause in thought that was never resumed. She spent her afternoons in the sunroom surrounded by her husband's books and the humming silence of memory. Sometimes she talked aloud, not because she'd gone soft, but because silence, when it settled too deeply, became too sharp to endure. At 75, Martha still kept her own checkbook, ran her own errands, and drove to town once a week for groceries. She was private, dignified, and just a touch stubborn enough to avoid the small talk of neighborly visits, but never unkind. The townspeople respected her not because of who she had been, but because she carried herself as though every hour still mattered. And yet, for all her quiet independence, Martha had grown familiar with a subtle ache. Not in her bones, though those occasionally groaned their complaints, but in the corners of her life where laughter used to echo. She'd only had one child, Clara, a bright, strong-willed girl who'd inherited her mother's conviction, but not always her compassion. Martha had loved her fiercely, too fiercely, perhaps sheltering her from the world's worst truths while trying to prepare her for its harshness. Their calls had grown fewer over the years. Birthdays, major holidays, the occasional check-in after news of a hurricane or political drama, but never enough to close the distance that had crept in since Harold's funeral. That distance closed suddenly one Tuesday morning. The phone rang during breakfast. Martha recognized Clara's voice at once, though it was strained, rushed, and brittle like a wall about to crack. "Mom, Clara, I didn't want to call like this, but we're in trouble. Martha said nothing, letting the silence pull the truth free. It's Mitchell. His investments tanked. Real estate collapse in Houston. We put too much into it. The house is being foreclosed. The bank gave us 90 days, but it's over. We've lost it. Martha's hand tightened around her coffee mug. I see. We don't know what to do. The kids, Isaac and Emily, they don't know yet. I didn't want to tell them until we had a plan. And Mitchell's brother offered to help, but that's a no-go. He's barely keeping his own business afloat. So we thought, you want to come here? A beat of silence. Then, just for a while, just until we find something. You have space. You always said the house was too big for one person, and you'd get to see the kids more. You haven't seen them in, 8 months? I saw them last spring. Mom, please. Clara's voice cracked not with tears, but with the sharp edge of desperation laced with entitlement. The voice of someone used to always finding a way, now finding herself out of moves. I'll need time to make arrangements, Martha said, her tone level. The guest rooms haven't been used in years. Of course. Thank you, Mom, really. Just a few months, all right. But Martha knew the shape of things when they started this way. A few months had a way of growing into something permanent when pride was injured and consequences came due. She hung up the phone and stared at the living room wall. Framed along it were portraits from a life spent in moments. Clara's high school graduation, their trip to Yellowstone, a photo of Harold in uniform younger than Isaac was now. It was all still here, the life she'd built, the love she'd stored in shelves and drawers, and the soft linens of a made bed. And now it was about to be inhabited by ghosts she hadn't invited. The house hadn't been empty. It had been full of memory of rituals of peace. Now it would be occupied by noise, by habits not hers, by the slow erosion of space. She stared down the hall toward the back of the house. There was a room down there once, a linen closet, now used to store cleaning supplies and a few boxes Harold had never unpacked. She hadn't entered it in years. A shiver crept through her spine. She didn't know why she thought of that room now, but something about it. Something about the way Clara had said, just for a while. Martha placed her mug in the sink and pressed her palms to the counter. The sunlight spilled through the kitchen window and fell upon the wood with soft certainty. You hear that, Harold, she murmured. They're coming. She turned, stood tall, and reached for the key to the front hall closet. If her family was returning, she would be ready not just to welcome them, but to protect what little sanctuary she had left. The walls of the house stood still, watching. They had seen everything, and they would bear witness to what was about to unfold. Under the bright glare of a Sunday sun, the Ellison house stirred with a chaos it hadn't known in years. The van pulled into the gravel driveway at exactly 10:07 a.m., tires crunching over the small stones that Harold used to rake into neat lines every fall. The side doors slid open, and in a flurry of limbs and voices, Clara's family spilled out like a rushed wind. Isaac grabbed that suitcase. And no, not the small one that's Emily's, Clara called out, balancing a diaper bag over one shoulder and a stainless steel coffee tumbler in her hand. Mitchell followed, lugging 2 oversized duffel bags with athletic logos stitched across the sides. He gave Martha a tight smile from beneath his sunglasses. Hey, Ma. Good to see you. Martha stood on the porch, her hands resting gently over one another. Her back was straight, her breath was steady. She nodded as if to a neighbor rather than a son-in-law. Welcome. Clara climbed the porch steps and kissed her mother on the cheek, quick, perfunctory, the way one seals a business agreement. Thanks again for doing this, Mom. I don't know what we would have done otherwise. Martha didn't reply. She simply turned and pushed the screen door open. That evening, over homemade chicken soup and crusty sourdough bread, laughter echoed in the dining room for the first time in a long while. Emily, only 6, had taken a liking to the chandelier, claiming it looked like a magical spider web. Isaac found his grandfather's antique globe and spun it like a roulette wheel, asking about the strange names under his fingers. The children's voices softened the edges of the room. For a moment, Martha allowed herself to believe this might work, that perhaps sharing space again could heal more than it disrupted. But time like rust moves subtly and stains slowly. By the second week, the house began to change in small, invisible ways. Martha noticed the blue china was moved from the dining cabinet and replaced with Clara's white ceramic set, more modern, more neutral. Her floral quilt was folded up and stored in the hall closet. The painting Harold loved above the fireplace was replaced by an abstract canvas Mitchell had purchased from a gallery in Portland. "It's just for a fresh vibe," Mom Clara had said cheerfully. "This place hasn't been updated in decades." Martha bit her tongue again. Then came the conversation about bedrooms. "We were thinking," Clara began one morning, standing at the kitchen island with her laptop open and a half-bitten croissant in her hand. "It might make more sense for us to take the master bedroom, you know, for the kids. They need the space. Isaac has his desk, and Emily's been having nightmares lately. Thought it would help if they stayed close." Martha stared at her daughter. The same mouth, same eyebrows, same jawline, but none of the softness Harold used to trace with his finger when Clara was small. "I sleep in the master bedroom," Martha said quietly. "That's where your father and I—" I know, Clara interrupted quickly, her voice dropping an octave, "and I'm not saying permanently, it's just, we'll all breathe easier. And you know what they say, at your age you should be on the ground floor, less risk of falls." The decision, like all the others, had already been made. The master bedroom was emptied by the following Sunday. Martha's belongings were packed into boxes, most of them by Mitchell, stacked in the hallway like artifacts awaiting transport. Martha watched from the top of the stairs, hands clenched around the railing. "No need to carry anything," Clara called cheerfully. "We've got it under control." The room she was assigned to wasn't a bedroom at all. It had once been a linen closet, later converted into a makeshift sewing room Harold never used. It sat at the far end of the hallway, past the guest bath near the back staircase that groaned with each step. A single narrow window overlooked the side yard, where ivy had long overtaken the fence. The wallpaper was peeling at the seams, water-stained in the corners. The light bulb flickered when turned on. There was no closet, only a small dresser, and the bed was a stiff twin cot Clara had ordered online. "It's cozy," Clara had chirped. "We'll get you a little reading lamp and maybe a rug. You'll love it." Martha stood in the doorway of the room, her bones aching not from the climb down, but from the slow collapse of something far deeper. It was not humiliation she felt, it was erasure, a silent agreement that she would recede like an old painting no longer framed. She moved in silence that night, folding her cardigans with practiced precision, lining her medicine bottles on the windowsill, placing Harold's photograph beside a chipped ceramic dish that held her wedding ring. The door to the hallway didn't close all the way unless yanked. It creaked every time someone passed by, as if to announce her isolation. 3 days later, Clara came knocking, holding a tray of sliced fruit and chamomile tea. "Mom, you've seemed off lately. Everything okay?" Martha looked up from her chair. "You've changed the entire house, rearranged everything without asking." Clara pouted. "It's just furniture. It's not like we threw anything away. Besides, you've always hated that old couch." "That couch was your father's favorite," Martha replied. "Well, he's not here anymore, is he?" Clara said, then immediately softened. "I didn't mean that the way it sounded." A silence stretched between them, taut and trembling. Clara stepped further into the room, looked around, and let out a theatrical sigh. "You know, maybe you're just overwhelmed. Adjusting. That's normal. But at your age, stress can really take a toll. Maybe it's time to let go of some responsibility. Let yourself rest." Martha's lips thinned. "Rest," she echoed. "Yeah," Clara said with false warmth. "You've carried enough for a lifetime. Let us take care of things now." That word. Let. As though Martha's life had passed into another's hands, and she was merely allowed to exist within its confines. By the 4th week, Martha's access to her own kitchen had changed. "Mom, I meal prepped for the week," Clara announced. "You don't need to worry about cooking. We're doing gluten-free now. It's better for the kids." Martha opened the fridge to find her yogurt replaced. Her jam gone, her tea moved to a top shelf she could barely reach. The pantry held unfamiliar brands, protein bars, organic flours, plant-based spreads. Not a single box of black tea remained. She said nothing. Each day something disappeared. A lamp, a blanket, a painting. She watched as the life she'd built was taken apart in small, polite thefts disguised as convenience. The final break came late one night. Martha had gone into the living room, her living room, to retrieve her sewing basket. She found Isaac sprawled across the couch watching a movie on his tablet, feet planted on the antique coffee table. Mitchell sat in Harold's old chair, scrolling through his phone, a bottle of beer in hand. Clara walked in moments later, carrying a basket of folded laundry. Martha lingered by the entryway. No one looked up. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Clara glanced at her. "What's wrong?" "I was looking for my sewing." "Oh, I think I moved that to the garage," Clara said. "We're clearing up clutter in the common spaces. It's better for the kids." Martha stood there, caught in the thin light of the hallway. Mitchell glanced up. "You okay, Ma?" Martha's voice was low. "This is still my home." Clara's smile faltered. "Of course it is, but we're all living here now. We just need to make adjustments. You know, for the bigger picture." The bigger picture. As if she was now a misplaced puzzle piece. She turned, walked back to the end of the hallway, and closed her door. This time she didn't bother to pull the faulty latch tight. Let it creak. Let the world know she was still here, even as they tried to pretend she wasn't. In the dark, her fingers found Harold's photo. She pressed her forehead to it and whispered, "They're not guests anymore, Harold. They've come to stay." And they brought silence with them. The rain had been falling for 2 days straight. Oregon in early May was often soaked in melancholy, and on this particular afternoon it felt like the sky was mourning something unspoken. Martha sat by the fogged-up window in her narrow room, a blanket draped across her knees, watching the droplets chase one another down the glass. She hadn't been sleeping well. The walls felt closer these days, and time had turned syrup thick. The ticking of the old alarm clock beside her bed was the only rhythm she could rely on. Her house, once a quiet sanctuary, now pulsed with other people's noises, footsteps that weren't hers, arguments that didn't belong to her, and laughter that seemed to echo from too far away. A soft knock pulled her from the window. Before she could answer, the door creaked open and Clara stepped in, holding a manila folder and a mug of peppermint tea. "Hey, Mom, brought you something warm." Martha turned from the window and took the mug, slowly murmuring a thank you. Clara set the folder on the small desk by the wall. "Do you have a second? I just need your help with something." "What is it?" "Just some paperwork. Boring legal stuff. With Mitchell's job loss and the temporary financial situation, the mortgage refinancing is stuck. Technically, the house is in your name, and the bank's been giving us hell about verification. They just need a signature temporary power of attorney so I can handle some things for you. Utility bills, property tax filings. You know how it is, bureaucracy." Martha blinked. "Power of attorney. Temporary," Clara emphasized. "Very limited. It's not like I'll be controlling your life or anything." Her voice was bright, airy, the way someone speaks to an aging relative they're trying to soothe. But Martha heard something else beneath it, a practiced rhythm too smooth to be spontaneous. Clara opened the folder and pulled out a set of documents. "Look, it's even notarized. We just need your signature on the bottom lines. No rush, of course, but sooner would be better. Mitchell wants to get ahead of the escrow rework next month." Martha took the pen Clara offered. Her fingers trembled slightly. The legal language swam before her eyes. Dense paragraphs of clauses, subclauses, and fine print. "Couldn't you have explained this sooner?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Clara smiled, brushing Martha's shoulder. "I didn't want to worry you, Mom. You've been through a lot. We're just trying to make things easier for everyone." Martha hesitated. Her instincts flared briefly, but they were dulled by fatigue, by the mental fog that had settled since the move. She thought of how often she'd felt dismissed lately, how her body and mind were slowly betraying her, how the once familiar hallways of her home had turned into corridors of silence. She signed. "Thank you," Clara said quickly, scooping up the papers. "I'll take care of the filing. You really don't need to stress about it anymore. We'll handle everything." Martha nodded absently and returned her gaze to the window. That night something shifted. Clara began speaking differently. She took control of the calendar, appointments, groceries, prescriptions, all now filtered through her schedule. Martha found her checkbook missing from the drawer she'd always kept it in. Her mailbox keys had been replaced with a shared family P.O. box at the post office. Clara told her it was more efficient. "It's just simpler this way," she said. "You don't need to worry about errands anymore." Then came the bank card. "Mitchell and I are consolidating household expenses," Clara explained one morning. "We'll just keep everything on one account so it's easier to manage. You'll still have access, of course, but just let me know if you need anything." A replacement card jointly managed appeared on Martha's nightstand the next day. Her old one was gone. The control was so incremental it didn't feel like theft. It felt like erosion, subtle and methodical. She wasn't forbidden from doing anything, but each decision now passed through another voice. A filter, a delay. Martha began to shrink within herself. She stopped baking. She stopped calling her friend Alice from church. She hesitated before making tea or watching her favorite gardening shows because Clara had taken to napping on the living room couch and Emily used the TV for cartoons. "Mom, you should rest more," Clara told her. "You've done enough. Let the next generation carry the load now." But Martha didn't feel lighter. She felt erased. One night, just past 11:00 p.m., Martha awoke to the sound of a low voice in the hallway. Her hearing wasn't what it used to be, but she could tell it was Clara's. The carpeted floors muffled her footsteps, but the hallway vent carried sound like a funnel into Martha's cramped room at the end of the hall. She sat up in bed slowly and leaned toward the vent grill on the far wall. The air was cool metallic. The voice floated in clearly. "No, she signed it last week. Completely compliant. She didn't even read it." Silence. Then Clara's voice again, slightly hushed but edged with excitement. "Look, I'm just saying. Once we finish the second appraisal, we can quietly shop it around. You said the market's hot for historical properties. Victorian 2.5 acres, good bones." A pause. "Yeah, exactly. Near downtown. And no mortgage. It's all equity. If we stage it right, we could clear 7 figures. Easy." Martha's blood turned cold. Another pause, a faint laugh. "No, she has no idea. As far as she's concerned, we're just fixing pipes and repainting. She thinks this is about utilities and bills." The call ended shortly after. Martha didn't move for several minutes. She stared at the wall, her mind strangely calm. Not angry, not panicked, but cold, colder than it had ever been, even in the field tents of 73, when she held young boys bleeding out in monsoon mud. She had signed her house away. She was being sold out by her own daughter. She reached under her pillow for the rosary she rarely used, not for prayer, but as habit, a totem of grounding. The beads were warm in her hands. Martha had seen deception before. In war, in politics, in the dark corners of human desperation. But betrayal in the shape of family was a pain that moved differently, slower, sharper, closer to the bone. She lay back down, eyes wide open in the dark, the ceiling above her a canopy of remembered choices. They thought she was too tired to notice. They thought her years had dulled her. But Martha Ellison had survived jungle's riots, men dying in her arms, and a grief that stretched 14 long years after Harold passed. They'd made one mistake. They underestimated her. The airport was bustling that morning. A typical spring break weekend full of families in matching sweatshirts and couples lugging roller bags heavier than their relationships. Martha sat by the window of Gate C-12, her small leather purse tucked under one arm, a printed boarding pass in her lap. She wore her travel cardigan, the same one Harold had given her before their anniversary trip to Santa Fe years ago. Clara had insisted on a family getaway to Florida. "Just a few days of sun," Mom, Clara had said, placing a hand on Martha's shoulder with the same polished charm she used on neighbors and realtors. "It'll be good for us. A reset." Martha had wanted to believe it. A part of her, the aching part, still foolish enough to hope, had imagined sunrises over the Atlantic and shared breakfasts, maybe even laughter. The flight was overbooked. Mitchell argued with the gate agent over seat assignments, while Clara hovered beside him, whispering sharp things through her teeth. The children were glued to their devices. "Mom, would you mind switching your seat?" Clara asked as she handed over a boarding pass. "You'll be closer to the lavatory. Just easier for you, you know." Martha nodded. Of course. The flight passed in silence. No one talked to her. No one even looked her way. She might as well have been cargo. They landed in Tampa. The air was thick, humid, too eager to cling to skin. Martha struggled to keep up as the family shuffled into the rental car line. But by the time she reached the desk, Mitchell had already driven off with everyone else, leaving her to wait with their luggage. By the time they arrived at the resort, the sun was low, and Clara had booked massages for everyone except Martha. "You wouldn't enjoy it," Clara explained. "You hate strangers touching you, remember?" That night they went out for dinner at a seafood place near the marina. Martha had a mild headache but said nothing. She smiled through the meal, ate, slowly ignored the way Clara nudged her untouched scallops with thinly veiled irritation. "You feeling okay, Mom?" Clara asked as they stepped into the elevator back at the hotel. "A bit tired," Martha said softly. The next morning she woke up alone in her room. The clock read 7:08 a.m. Her door was cracked and a note had been slid under it. "Mom, you fainted last night in the hallway. Don't worry. We took you to Clearwater General for observation. The doctors said you should rest. We'll come check on you this afternoon. Love, Clara." The paper trembled in her hands. She had no memory of fainting. She remembered brushing her teeth. She remembered laying out her shoes for the next day's walk. But then, what? A nurse walked in mid-morning, clipboard in hand. Young, fresh-faced, a little too cheerful for a hospital shift. His name tag read Daniel Wexler, MD, resident. "Morning, Mrs. Ellison," he said with a smile. "Looks like you've got a quiet room today." Martha sat up slowly. "What happened to me?" Daniel glanced at the chart. "Your daughter said you fainted, but your vitals are fine. We ran blood work, did a CT scan, hydration panel, nothing abnormal. So I didn't faint." "Well," he said, hesitating, "you're healthy for 75, healthier than most of the interns on this floor." She looked away, her throat tight. "No one's come to check on me," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "Not since admission." Martha shook her head. He glanced toward the hallway, then back at her. "I'll check again. But first, can I ask something personal?" he said gently. She nodded. "Do you feel safe with your family?" Her eyes snapped up to meet his. That single question, simple, direct, cracked something open. She couldn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she knew too well. Daniel sat down beside her bed. "We see situations like this sometimes. Elder neglect, not always intentional, but patterns. Your record says your daughter admitted you last night, but she left before we finished intake. No emergency contacts, no updates, no calls today. If they were truly concerned, they'd be here." Martha said nothing. Daniel leaned in. "You're not obligated to go back into an unsafe situation." Tears welled at the edges of her eyes, not from fear, from recognition. Someone saw her. He stood. "I want to introduce you to someone, a friend of mine, Linda Marsh. She's an attorney, works pro bono with elder law and guardianship abuse. Just talk to her, no pressure." That evening, Linda arrived. Mid-40s, tightly curled hair, pinned back, tailored blazer over jeans. She walked in like someone who didn't ask permission, only stated facts. "Martha," she said, extending a hand. "Daniel told me about you. I don't want to take up much time, but I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing." They sat together for almost an hour. Martha spoke slowly at first, tentatively. She described the move-in, the change in tone, the room at the end of the hallway. Then she described the papers Clara had asked her to sign. Linda nodded, scribbling occasionally. "Do you have copies of those papers?" she asked. "No, she took them after I signed." "Did you read them?" Martha looked down at her hands. "Not really. She said it was temporary, to help with bills." Linda was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Did you ever hear her discussing your property? Anything about appraisal sales, third-party contacts?" Martha hesitated, then nodded once. "She made a call. I overheard it. She said if they staged the house right, they could clear 7 figures. Linda exhaled slowly. "And do you remember any names?" "Did she mention a realtor?" "No, but she said the word equity, said I had no idea." "That's enough for a starting point." Linda reached into her satchel and pulled out a small folder. "This is a client intake form. Not a commitment, just gives me permission to look into things. If you want me to, no pressure. But if she did coerce you into signing over durable power of attorney and is attempting to sell your property without your knowledge, that's a felony." Martha stared at the paper. Her hands shook as she reached for the pen. "I don't want revenge," she said quietly. "I just want my life back." "That's exactly what we'll aim for," Linda said. Nothing more, nothing less. Martha signed. Outside the hospital window, the Florida sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in purples and deepening golds. The horizon glowed like a promise she hadn't dared believe in. She wasn't alone anymore. Not this time. The sun in Clearwater was still high and blinding when Martha signed her discharge papers. Clara had not returned to pick her up. Daniel stood by the exit with a reusable grocery bag, carrying her belongings. A change of clothes, the paperback novel she never finished on the flight, and the tiny box of breath mints Clara had tossed into her purse like a thoughtless kindness. Linda Marsh was already waiting outside. She drove an old blue Volvo with cracked leather seats and a stack of legal pads in the back. No music, just the sound of tires rolling over Florida asphalt as they headed toward a small legal office tucked between a strip mall and an abandoned Pizza Hut. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of copier ink. Linda motioned Martha into a small conference room and opened her laptop. "Let's start with what we know," she said. "Your home was fully owned by you and your late husband, correct?" "Yes. Harold and I paid off the mortgage in 2006, and the title was under both names." "Yes, until Harold died. After that, it transferred to me alone." Linda nodded, typing rapidly. "Clara told you she needed you to sign some paperwork to help with utility payments and refinancing, but what you actually signed was a broad-scope, durable power of attorney. No expiration date. Full asset control." Martha's breath caught. Linda continued. "I pulled the property title history. 3 weeks ago, a quitclaim deed was filed transferring full ownership of the property from you to an entity called Ellison Family Trust, of which Clara is listed as the sole trustee." "That's not... I never..." "You didn't, but the signature on the deed is yours, or at least it appears to be." Martha's eyes filled with slow, burning heat. She wasn't sure if it was rage or shame. Maybe both. "She forged it." Linda leaned back. "Possibly. Or she used the power of attorney you gave her to file on your behalf. It's a gray area, legally dubious, morally bankrupt." The room felt smaller, heavier. "She owns my house." "On paper, yes," Linda said. "But we can challenge it, especially if we can prove coercion fraud or lack of mental capacity at the time of signing, which clearly was fabricated." "I was tired. I didn't read it all." Linda's voice softened. "You trusted her. That's not a crime. What she did with that trust might be..." Martha gripped the edge of the table. The room swayed slightly. "I want to fight this," she said, voice steady. "But not yet. Not with lawyers and courts. Not until I have more than accusations." Linda's brow arched. "What are you thinking?" "I want to hear her say it." Linda studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, we'll move carefully. But if you're going to get close, I need you to be prepared. Emotionally, legally. You'll be walking into a hornet's nest." "I'm not afraid of hornets," Martha said. "I've buried men younger than Mitchell in field hospitals with fewer supplies than my sewing kit." Linda smiled. "Fair enough." That night back in Oregon, Clara greeted Martha with an exaggerated fussiness. "Oh, Mom, thank God, we were so worried." "I left you 4 voicemails," Martha said coolly. Clara faltered. "My phone's been acting up, and Mitchell was swamped with work. The kids had school." Martha just nodded. "I'm tired. I'll go lie down." The following days passed quietly. Too quietly. Clara moved through the house with an almost practiced guilt, checking on Martha more often, making herbal tea without asking, even inviting her to a movie night in the living room, which Martha declined. But Martha noticed other things. A yellow folder tucked into Clara's bag labeled "Staging Quotes." A text message preview on Clara's phone screen. "Is the deed clean?" A long conversation on the back porch, hushed but intense. Martha said nothing. She watched. She waited. Then she made a decision. 2 days later, she walked into a pawn shop on the edge of town and bought a used digital voice recorder for $28. It was small, square, the kind that clipped onto a pocket or slid beneath a sofa cushion unnoticed. She paid in cash. That night, once everyone had gone to bed, Martha crept into the living room. Her bones protested every step, but she moved slowly, deliberately. She tucked the recorder beneath the center couch cushion, just near the edge where Clara's voice would fall naturally if she sat there, which she often did for her weekly real estate calls. She pressed record and left it there. For 3 nights in a row, she retrieved it after midnight, reviewed the audio using headphones, and cleared the memory each morning. Nothing But on the fourth night, the click of Clara's heels echoed across the floor, the thump of a folder landing on the coffee table, the sound of her sigh as she dialed a number. "Hi, Tony. Yeah, we're moving forward. My mom's back from the hospital. I've got her playing along for now. She still thinks I'm managing her prescriptions or something. She hasn't asked a single question about the deed." Martha's heart pounded. She sat in her dark room, the audio file crackling in her ears. She signed over full POA. "It's rock solid. I had it notarized by Mitchell's cousin. If she even tries to reverse it, it'll be her word against the paperwork. But honestly, she won't. She's slipping, quiet, passive, doesn't want confrontation. You'll see." There was a pause, then Clara laughed. "No, I haven't told her about the open house next month. Can you imagine she'd bake cookies for the guests? Like this is still her house. Jesus." Another pause. "Staging will start next week. I'm moving her room boxes into the garage. Shouldn't be hard. The old woman's practically invisible." Martha stopped the tape. She sat for a long time in silence. The ache in her chest wasn't just grief anymore. It was clarity. Cold, clean, slicing through everything she had once softened with patience. She transferred the file to a thumb drive and slipped it into a hollowed-out book on her shelf, an old copy of Little Women. Appropriate, she thought. The next morning she sat at the kitchen table watching Clara hum while preparing a smoothie. "Do you ever miss being a little girl?" Martha asked suddenly. Clara turned. "What? Do you remember this house when you were 7? The way Harold used to pull you around the living room in that old laundry basket pretending it was a spaceship?" Clara chuckled, vaguely. "I remember everything Martha said, every scuff on the molding, every birthday party, every tantrum and midnight fever." Clara looked confused. "Where's this coming from?" Martha just smiled. "Nowhere in particular." Inside her mind, however, the pieces were aligning. She had her proof. She had Linda, and she had time. Not much, but enough. The tension in the house thickened, invisible but undeniable, like smoke without fire, something acrid lingering just beneath the surface. Martha felt it in the way Clara moved, in the clipped tone of her voice, the way she shut doors a little too hard or stared a little too long when Martha entered a room unannounced. But Martha had learned the art of silence long before Clara was born. In the war, it had saved lives. Now it would save the last piece of hers. The voice recorder, now hidden behind the ceramic vase on the bookshelf, had become her weapon of choice. She checked it religiously, careful not to overwrite anything important, transferring files to her laptop one at a time, and backing them up on a flash drive she'd taped inside a hollow section beneath the bedroom floorboards. Harold had built that compartment when he used to hide cash and family jewelry during the Vietnam panic years. She remembered his words, "People don't look where they don't believe they've been lied to." 3 nights after the first confession, Clara invited someone over. The tone was casual, a real estate friend just stopping by to catch up. Martha knew better. Clara had cleaned the living room meticulously that morning, rearranged pillows, placed a decorative bowl of lemons on the counter, as if this were a lifestyle magazine shoot. She'd smiled at Martha as she walked past. "Mom, can you give us some space this afternoon? The kids will be with Mitchell, and I need a quiet moment to talk business." "Of course," Martha said, folding the morning paper with precision. "I'll be in the garden." She wasn't. She was behind the laundry room door that connected to the vent system, the same ductwork that carried whispers all the way to the far end of the hall. Her recorder was already rolling. Headphones in knees against the tile, she sat and listened in real time. Clara's voice came through crisp and clear. "Tony, she has no clue." "None. I mean, it's laughable. She still thinks this place is hers. She asked me the other day if we could repaint the porch like she's in charge." Tony, the agent, laughed. "Well, technically she was, until she gave it up. You got the POA filed and sealed. The quitclaim deed transferred it to the trust 2 weeks ago. She signed that too, though she thought she was approving a landscaping permit. I mean, bless her." More laughter. Clara lowered her voice, but Martha adjusted the gain. The words came through anyway. "This house is about to be money, Tony. Big money. She has no idea we're listing next month. Once she's settled into that senior condo we've been eyeing, it'll hit the market fast. I'm already talking to staging crews." Martha's jaw clenched. Her fingers curled tight around the recorder. "She doesn't need a big house anyway. She's practically a ghost, quiet, frail. I keep the fridge stocked and she acts like that's a gift from heaven. Tony paused. You sure she won't fight back? She won't. She can barely hold a pen steady. And if she does, we've got enough paperwork to paint her as mentally unstable. One trip to the hospital and boom, instant leverage. Damn, Tony muttered. That's cold. That's survival, Clara said flatly. She's had her life. It's our turn. That night, Martha didn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the conversation echoing in her head like cannon fire. But it wasn't rage that consumed her. It was focus. By morning, she was on the phone with Linda. Linda Marsh didn't waste words. She listened as Martha played the recording fingers, already flying across her laptop keyboard. By the end of the 30-minute audio, she had opened 3 tabs, filled out a complaint form, and downloaded the necessary state elder abuse statutes. This is more than enough, she said. You've got evidence of coercion fraud and intent to defraud under POA, plus an illegally executed quitclaim deed filed without full disclosure. If we act quickly, we can freeze the title transfer before it escalates. Will it hold up in court? Absolutely. But I'm not waiting for a courtroom. I'm filing a civil injunction today. That'll prevent her from listing or selling the house until we settle ownership through hearing. Martha nodded slowly. She'll know I'm coming for her. Linda met her gaze. Let her. By Tuesday afternoon, Clara knew. It was subtle at first. She returned from the grocery store with a bouquet of daisies and placed them on Martha's table. Thought these might brighten your room, she said sweetly. Martha nodded, never meeting her eyes. Thank you. Then came the missing laptop. Martha had left it open that morning after emailing Linda. By evening it was gone. I don't know where you last put it, Clara said when Martha asked. Maybe check the closet. Martha knew better. The closet hadn't held electronics since 1989. That evening, as Martha made tea, Clara appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed. Mom, is there something you want to tell me? Martha didn't flinch, such as, I just got off the phone with Tony. He says someone filed an injunction against the trust, froze the deed. That wouldn't be you, would it? Martha turned from the stove, lifting her cup with slow precision. You said it yourself, Clara. I'm just a ghost. What would I know about court filings? Clara's smile collapsed. You're making a mistake. No, you made the mistake. You thought I wouldn't hear. You thought silence was the same thing as surrender. Clara's eyes narrowed. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. They stared at each other, 2 women bound by blood and betrayal, the past, like a shadow between them. Clara's voice dropped. You're really going to turn this into a war? Martha took a long sip of her tea. It already is. That night the hallway hummed with unspoken tension. Doors shut harder. Steps fell heavier. Even Mitchell, oblivious as ever, seemed aware of the chill radiating from the far end of the corridor. But in Martha's room there was no fear, only preparation and resolve. The lock clicked. It was a quiet sound, so soft it might have gone unnoticed on any other night. But in the stillness of the hallway, with only the distant hum of the dishwasher in the background, that metallic snap slammed into Martha's chest like a gunshot. She stepped toward the doorknob and turned it. It didn't move. She tried again, slower this time, more deliberate. Still nothing. The brass knob remained cold and unmoved beneath her fingers. She was locked in. Her hand dropped. From beyond the door came the creak of footsteps, followed by hushed whispers, Clara's voice unmistakably clipped and brittle. Don't look at me like that, Mitchell. She brought this on herself. She's your mother, Mitchell muttered. She's a liability, Clara snapped. She went behind our backs, hired lawyers, froze the house title, and probably recorded everything I said. She's not senile, she's vindictive. Martha stood in the center of her small room, the walls suddenly tighter than ever. Her breath came in shallow waves. She wasn't scared, she was calculating. The moment had come, and now she had to survive it. A soft knock came at her door an hour later. Then Clara's voice, syrupy and lethal. Mom, are you all right in there? Martha didn't respond. I'm worried about you, Clara continued. You've been acting confused, aggressive. I spoke with a doctor about what's going on. Early signs of dementia, maybe, or something worse. Silence. If things keep escalating, we may need to consider professional care, a facility, somewhere safe. Martha stared at the recorder she'd hidden beneath her pillow. She turned it on. "Don't do this," she said through the door. "I'm not doing anything," Clara said. "You're the one who started a legal war over something you don't even understand. You're sick, Mom. You need help." Behind those words was an unmistakable threat. They were building a case to declare her incompetent, unfit, unstable. If they succeeded, she would lose everything: her freedom, her home, her story. But Martha Ellison hadn't survived war zones to be outmaneuvered by her own blood. As midnight approached, she pried open the back of her analog radio, the one Clara had called junk and nearly tossed months ago. Inside, taped to the battery cavity, was her last flash drive copies of all the voice recordings, including Clara's latest threats. She slid it into the hem of her sock and pulled her pants leg down tightly. Then she opened the drawer and pulled out the cheap prepaid flip phone Daniel had given her as a backup, buried beneath a stack of old church bulletins. She powered it on the green glow illuminating the shadows. 1 bar of signal. Enough! She typed a single message and sent it to Linda and Daniel, locked in. Threats escalating. Sent evidence. Need help. She clicked send. Then she waited. Minutes passed. Each tick of the clock stretched into something longer than time. Then her phone vibrated once. "Daniel, we're coming. Don't say a word. Don't open the door. Police en route." Outside her room she could hear Clara pacing. Then another voice, Mitchell again. "She's not going to just sit in there forever." "She's not going anywhere," Clara hissed. "She can rot in there until the hearing, and if she steps out of line again, I'll have her evaluated. Legally." They thought they'd won, but downstairs headlights split through the blinds, tires ground to a stop on the gravel. Then came the pounding. Not Martha's door, the front door. Clara Ellison, a voice boomed. "Firm, official." Footsteps scrambled. A curtain was hastily pulled back. "What? Who are you?" Clara's voice cracked. "Detective Halverson, Washington County Sheriff's Office. We received a welfare call for Martha Ellison. We need to see her, now." "There's been a misunderstanding. She's resting." "Ma'am, step aside." Doors opened. Boots crossed floors. Mitchell began shouting something about privacy, due process, but he was drowned out by the rising storm of orders and flashlights and legal urgency. Martha stood calmly, her recorder still tucked in her pocket, when the knock came. "Mrs. Ellison, it's Officer James. We're here to help you. Is it safe for us to enter?" She unlocked the door. The hinges groaned. Outside stood 2 uniformed officers and Daniel, his face pale, jaw, clenched eyes burning with purpose. "Martha," he breathed. "Are you all right?" "I am now," she said, stepping into the hallway. Clara came barreling toward them, hair-wild robe flapping. "No, you can't just take her. This is my house. She's sick. She's mentally. She's not going anywhere with you," Linda said, suddenly appearing behind the officers, her blazer buttoned to the throat court file in hand. "You have no right," Clara shrieked. "You're a traitor, Mom. A goddamn traitor." Martha didn't blink. She met her daughter's rage with calm steel. "I'm not your hostage, Clara, and this was never your house." The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full of history, of betrayal, of everything that had been taken, and now at last reclaimed. Daniel held out a coat. "Let's go home," he said. Martha nodded and stepped into the night. The headlines came like thunder after the lightning strike. "Elder woman locked in room by daughter in shocking property scheme." Oregon matriarch fights back in rare elder abuse case. The betrayal behind the Ellison estate. How a mother exposed her daughter's plot. Within days, the story had gone viral. Local news vans lined the street where the Ellison home stood, once proud, now marked with yellow tape and a for sale sign turned on its head. Neighbors who had once waved politely to Clara now stood behind fences, whispering in shock. Mothers pulled their children closer when Mitchell walked by. Reporters ambushed him outside gas stations, grocery stores, even the post office. "Do you have anything to say about the allegations? Were you part of the plan to defraud your mother-in-law? Does your wife regret what she did?" Mitchell, ever the coward, said nothing. Clara, on the other hand, had been advised to remain silent by her attorney, a man more familiar with embezzlement than empathy. The charges were swift and severe. Count I, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Count 2, unlawful imprisonment. Count 3, attempted fraudulent conveyance of real property, and buried beneath the legalese an avalanche of evidence, voice recordings, texts, emails, notarized lies, witness testimonies, and most damning of all, the audio where Clara laughed, "She still thinks it's her house." It was more than a case. It became a symbol. Community forums erupted with fury. Advocates for elder rights demanded reforms. Lawmakers cited Martha's story in committee hearings on financial guardianship abuse. Linda Marsh was invited to speak at 3 different conferences in 2 weeks. Daniel received an award for ethical courage in medicine from the Oregon Health Board. And Martha, she sat in a modest guest room in Linda's home, quietly folding laundry, tending potted violets, and preparing herself for the trial. Because there would be a trial. No plea deals, no quiet settlements, no backroom apologies. Clara had made her choices. Martha would make hers. The courthouse was gray and silent, a box of cold stone that seemed indifferent to justice. But the courtroom was alive with tension, with history, with stares that cut and questions that bled. Martha sat on the witness stand wearing a navy dress with pearl buttons and the silver cross Harold had given her on their last Christmas together. She looked older now, thinner, but her spine was straight, her eyes sharp. The prosecutor's voice was crisp. "Mrs. Ellison, can you describe how your daughter first approached you about signing over control of your assets?" Martha didn't blink. She said she needed help paying bills, that the bank required authorization, that it was temporary. "She used my trust to rob me." "And did you sign those papers under the impression she was being honest?" "Yes." "Were you aware at the time that she was transferring ownership of your home into a trust she controlled?" "No." "Did you ever give her permission to lock you in your room?" "No." "Did you ever ask to be evaluated for mental instability or agree to be placed in an assisted living facility?" "I asked for none of that," Martha said. "I asked only for respect, and she gave me silence, then betrayal." The courtroom was still. Clara sat across from her in a dark blouse and pencil skirt, her hair pulled tight, as if discipline could conceal decay. She didn't look up. She didn't even flinch. But Martha saw her hands clenching and unclenching beneath the defense table. Then came the cross-examination. The defense attorney was polished, rehearsed. "Mrs. Ellison, would you say your memory is as reliable today as it was 10 years ago?" Linda rose. "Objection. Age-based prejudice. Sustained." He tried again. "Mrs. Ellison, are you aware your daughter claims she acted in your best interest?" Martha held her gaze. "I'm aware she claimed it. I'm also aware of what she did. She says you were becoming confused, that you misplaced things, repeated stories." "So do plenty of people under stress," Martha cut in. "But I don't forget betrayal." There was a pause. Then he said, "Do you still consider her your daughter?" The courtroom held its breath. Martha looked directly at Clara for the first time since she'd been rescued from the house. "My daughter," she said softly, "died the moment she looked at me and saw only profit." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge called for silence, but the words hung in the air like smoke, slow, bitter, permanent. Outside the courthouse, the sun had the gall to shine. Martha stood on the steps, reporters swarming, microphones shoved forward like spears. "Do you have anything to say, Mrs. Ellison?" She looked into the cameras, not with vengeance, but with resolve. "I fought a war when I was 21, she said. "I patched wounds, held hands as boys died, and buried friends in foreign soil. But this is the war I never saw coming. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from your own blood. And when it does, you either stay silent or you stand up." She turned and walked down the steps. She didn't look back. The gavel struck. 1 count of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, guilty. 1 count of unlawful imprisonment, guilty. 1 count of attempted fraudulent conveyance of real property, guilty. The judge's voice rang out with cool finality. Martha didn't close her eyes. She didn't flinch or cry. She simply exhaled a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding for months. In that moment, the tightness in her chest loosened, not in triumph but in release. The courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs trailing behind stunned reporters and spectators. Mitchell disappeared like vapor. Clara was taken into custody pending sentencing and eventual appeal. Her eyes never met Martha's. Perhaps they never would again. Outside, Daniel placed a hand gently on Martha's shoulder. "You did it." "No," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We did it." But even in her victory, there was no taste of revenge on her tongue. Only resolve, only purpose. 3 weeks later, the deed to the Ellison estate, her estate, was returned in full. Linda called it poetic justice. Daniel called it a miracle. Martha simply called it mine. She stood in the foyer of the home where so much of her life had unraveled and stitched itself back together again. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass panels Harold had installed years before. The oak floors gleamed with freshly polished memory. The silence now was not suffocating. It was sacred. And yet she knew she could not stay here. This house was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a vessel of ghosts, some kind, some cruel. It wasn't where she would spend the rest of her years, but maybe, just maybe, it could be the beginning of someone else's. The for sale sign went up the following Monday. A young couple from Eugene bought the home within 3 weeks. They had 2 daughters and a third on the way. Martha met them once briefly and smiled at the way the woman touched the front porch railing with awe, the way the man ran his hand along the banister and said, "This place has soul." It did, and now it had a future. With the proceeds, Martha didn't downsize. She didn't travel the world or move into a luxury condo. Instead, she purchased an old shuttered boarding house on the edge of the Columbia River, half forgotten, wholly neglected. She walked through the peeling hallways the first day, touching wallpaper that curled like paper-thin skin, hearing the echoes of silence that begged for stories. She saw a room at the end of the corridor, its window broken, its door hanging loose. And she knew that's where it would begin. She called it the house at the end of the hall. But on the front sign, etched in wood with gentle hands and a steel spine, she carved the name in full: The Last Hallway Home, a place for the forgotten. It started with 6 beds. A retired librarian named Judy, whose son moved to Canada and left no forwarding address. A former bus driver named Arnold, whose wife had died and whose stepchildren refused his calls. A woman named Gloria, who once danced in Vegas and now wept when she couldn't remember the last person who held her hand without hurrying. Martha painted walls. She scrubbed windows. She laid out quilts and baked pies. And when the ache in her bones reminded her she was 75, she smiled at the pain and worked anyway, because this was not charity. It was redemption. Soon more arrived. Word spread through church bulletins, community boards, whispers passed on from one bus stop to another. The elderly, the neglected, the emotionally abandoned, they came with worn suitcases and heavier stories. One by one, they took rooms along the hallway, and Martha greeted each the same way: "You're safe. You're home." Every resident brought a piece of the world with them. One morning, Arnold showed a boy from the local school how to whittle a walking stick. By afternoon, he had carved 5. Gloria taught the volunteers how to make perfect scrambled eggs using evaporated milk and forgiveness. Judy started a poetry group that met every Wednesday, and though her hands trembled when she wrote, her voice did not when she read. The rooms filled not only with people, but with music, laughter, cinnamon, and stories. And Martha, she found herself again, not as a victim, not as a cautionary tale, but as a builder, a witness, a caretaker of dignity. The back room, the one at the end of the hallway where it had all begun, became her favorite place. It was where she kept her garden journal, where she stored the voice recorder, where she sometimes sat late into the night, looking out over the river, breathing in the stillness she had earned. Linda visited often. "They're calling it a movement," she said one day, setting down a newspaper. 5 new centers modeled after yours. People are writing grants, citing your case as precedent. You have no idea how far this has gone." Martha smiled, folding a napkin slowly in her lap. "I didn't want it to go far," she said, "just deep." Daniel came by too, bringing fresh bread and laughter. "They're still talking about you at the hospital." He grinned. "Some nurses are saying you could run for mayor." "I've seen enough battles," she said. "I'll stick to bread pudding." But perhaps the most surprising moment came on a rainless afternoon in early spring. A taxi pulled into the gravel driveway. Martha didn't recognize the woman who stepped out at first. She was thinner, paler. Her clothes hung on her like memory. But her eyes hadn't changed. Clara stood at the gate, holding a manila envelope in one hand, a letter in the other. She didn't speak until Martha opened the door. "I'm not here for forgiveness," Clara said. "I don't expect that." Martha said nothing. I saw what you built." She looked down at her shoes. "It's beautiful." Silence stretched. Clara held out the envelope. I brought something. Not money, just papers, the transcripts, my own written statement. I've accepted the sentencing, but I wanted you to know I understand what I became. Martha took it. Her fingers didn't shake. Clara turned to leave, then paused. I miss her, she whispered. Who? Martha asked. Clara's voice cracked. The version of me that used to love you. Martha stood in the doorway of a house filled with those once discarded. A house stitched together with grace and grit. A house she had built from brokenness. You can miss her, she said, but you don't get to speak for her anymore. And with that she closed the door, not with anger, with peace, because some doors are meant to shut, so others can finally open. The morning light fell like gold through the trees. It was late spring, the kind of day where the breeze carried both warmth and memory. Inside the last hallway home, the corridors buzzed not with urgency or sadness, but with life. Arnold was already outside, sun hat askew, tending to a row of dahlias. He hummed as he worked the same song he'd once sung behind the wheel of Bus Route 9 through downtown Portland. Beside him, Gloria was perched on a stool, offering unsolicited advice between sips of tea. Too much water, Arnie. Flowers drown when you love them too much. Kind of like people, he muttered back, but with a smile. Near the patio, Judy led a book club under a makeshift pergola covered in climbing roses. She held A Tree Grows in Brooklyn like scripture, her voice low, tremulous, but firm when she read aloud. Inside the kitchen, laughter danced between chopping boards and simmering pots. A new resident, Tom, had just rediscovered his grandmother's potato soup recipe and was teaching 3 volunteers how to make dumplings from scratch. And down the main hallway, the one painted warm ochre and lined with framed poems and photographs, Martha Ellison sat in her rocking chair. The wooden slats creaked softly beneath her. A yellow notepad lay in her lap untouched. She wasn't writing today. She was watching, listening, breathing. Exactly 1 year had passed since the verdict. 12 months since she stood in court reclaiming both her home and her voice. 11 since she sold the Ellison estate. 10 since the first elder walked through the doors of this refuge. And 9 months since the world had begun calling her a visionary. She didn't care about titles. She cared about this. The rhythm of healing. The scent of bread baking and lavender blooming outside the front windows. The shared silence between people who had suffered long and loved longer. Then the front gate creaked. Not the casual squeal of someone coming to deliver groceries or drop off donated books. This sound was tentative, heavy. Martha rose slowly. Her knees ached, as they always did, but she moved steadily toward the window. She didn't need to guess who it was. She had dreamed this moment, feared it, prepared for it. But when her eyes fell on the figure at the gate, the air left her lungs. Clara. She looked different. The high heels were gone. So was the sleek hair and the practiced smile. In their place stood a woman unraveled. Clara wore a simple coat, her hands clutched tightly in front of her like she was trying to hold herself together. Her shoulders drooped not from fatigue, but from something deeper. Remorse, maybe. Grief. Martha opened the door but didn't speak. Clara didn't approach. She simply looked at her mother, tears already gathering in her eyes, and said, I didn't know where else to go. Martha said nothing. The silence between them stretched brittle and breaking with each heartbeat. I heard from someone at the shelter downtown that you started this place. I thought it was a rumor, but it's real. You made something real. She looked around, eyes glossing over the garden, the porch swing, the wind chimes. This is what you were always trying to give, Clara whispered. And I tried to take it all from you. Her voice cracked. I hurt you. I don't even know how to ask for forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive me. Still Martha didn't speak. Clara took a breath that sounded like it had been waiting in her lungs for a year. I was angry. At life. At you. At myself. I let bitterness twist me. I thought taking control would fix something, make the years I lost feel less empty. But all it did was make me someone I don't recognize. Someone I hate. She took a step closer. Tears slid down her cheeks, raw and real. I miss you, Mom. Not the house, not the money you. I miss your voice, your strength. I miss being your daughter. She paused, her voice just a whisper now. I know I don't deserve it, but I came to say I'm sorry." Martha didn't move. Not at first. She stood grounded, eyes locked on the broken woman who had once been her child. She searched for deception, for performance, for anything that might signal this was a manipulation wrapped in regret. She saw none, only truth. Clara's eyes were red, her body shook, and on her face was the naked expression of someone who had lost more than they had ever meant to gain. Finally, Martha spoke. Her voice was low, but it cut through the spring air like a chisel. "You didn't just take my house, Clara. You took my name off the walls. You made me feel like a shadow in my own life. You betrayed me, not just as a mother, but as a woman." Clara sobbed. Martha continued, voice steady. "There are people in this house who have been discarded, forgotten, and I swore they'd never feel the way you made me feel." She stepped forward now, close enough to smell the salt in her daughter's tears. "I cannot forget. I may never fully forgive. But I can look at you today and see not a thief, but a woman trying to find her way back." Clara fell to her knees. "I'm lost, Mom." Martha placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then stand up," she said, "and begin again." Clara looked up, and in that moment, beneath the soft bloom of magnolias, beneath the sun-washed porch, where hope had once seemed impossible, something shifted. Not a reconciliation, but a recognition. Two broken pieces realizing they still shared the same name. Martha didn't speak right away. The wind stirred lightly across the porch, sweeping past Clara's frame like a hush from another time. Her daughter stood, trembling, knees bent slightly, as if the weight of her own remorse was too much to bear. But Martha remained still, watching, feeling, listening, not just to Clara's words, but to something quieter beneath them. The ache, the yearning, the ghost of the child she once held to her chest under a stormy Oregon sky. She didn't reply. Instead, she turned. Her steps were slow, deliberate. The wood beneath her soles groaned with the familiarity of years. She walked back into the house through the common room where laughter and soup simmered past the rows of shoes by the mat, the trail of daffodils in a vase from Arnold's garden, and into the long corridor that had come to define her life. The hallway. To most it looked like any other, but to Martha it was sacred ground. Once she had been pushed down this very stretch with her belongings in a plastic bin, reduced to a ghost in her own home, a prisoner in a room meant for things not people, not mothers. And yet she had stayed. She had listened through the walls, recorded betrayal in the silence, and endured her own daughter's indifference, like a soldier waits out a siege. Now she stood before that same door. But it wasn't the same. The handle was no longer rusted. The wood had been refinished, sanded smooth, and painted the color of warm honey. A bronze nameplate hung above it, etched with gentle serif letters. "Room of Beginnings." Without a word, Martha reached for the knob and turned it. The door creaked open. Soft light poured through the bay window inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cedarwood. On one side of the room, a rocking chair sat near a small bookshelf stacked with journals, photo albums, and two framed needlepoints that read, "Still Here" and "Still Worthy." The walls were decorated with dozens of photographs, some faded, others fresh. Smiling elders holding teacups, embracing grandchildren, community gardens, birthday cakes lit with too many candles to count. And in the center of the room, beneath a skylight that bathed the carpet in gold, sat a small round table with two chairs, one occupied by a hand-knit cushion, the other empty. Martha stepped aside. She didn't speak, just looked back at Clara, whose eyes widened as she took in the space. It was hallowed, humble, healing. Martha gestured toward the empty chair. "If you're truly ready," she said quietly, "then start here." Clara looked up at her, lips trembling, heart racing beneath her ribs. Her heels remained planted for a moment longer, as though guilt still rooted her to the earth. Then slowly, shakily, she stepped forward. Each step echoed with memories, a slammed door, a signed form, a lie whispered over the phone. But also with possibility, a conversation not yet had, a sorrow not yet voiced. She crossed the threshold. The door didn't close behind her. Not yet. Martha watched as Clara looked around the room, touched the corner of the photo collage, her fingers trembling over a snapshot of Martha and Judy smiling over a pie last fall. Then quietly Clara moved to the chair. She didn't sit. She placed her hand on its back. Tears spilled from her eyes again, but this time she didn't try to wipe them away. "I want to help," she said. "I don't know how. I'm not sure I ever knew how, but I want to try." Martha nodded once. Then slowly she stepped backward. The camera of time pulled away as if honoring a moment too sacred for intrusion. From the hallway we see Clara finally lower herself into the chair, her shoulders folding inward, like someone allowing themselves to be seen for the very first time. Martha paused outside the doorway. Her hand reached for the handle, and this time gently. She closed the door. No lock, no noise, just a soft click like the settling of years. The frame lingers, a still image of a door closed not to keep someone out but to let something begin. Then, black screen, voiceover, soft, warm, resolute. Sometimes all a door needs is the right hand knocking at the right moment.